Hey guys, today's Bible reading devotion is found in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 14 and 15. 2 Timothy is written to Timothy by his father in the faith, Paul. And as Paul is penning this letter, he comes to chapter 3 and he is going to warn Timothy or tell Timothy that at some point people are going to turn away from God, that they are going to search after their own lusts, after the things of this world, and that they are going to indulge in sin and just be unfaithful to who God is, and more importantly, that they are just going to ultimately show themselves as an enemy to God. Well, he is telling Timothy here, he is just telling Timothy to make sure that Timothy remember whose he is and remember the faith that the faith in the things that he has learned since childhood. And in verse 14, he tells him to remember the things that he has learned and that he has become convinced of since childhood, since his grandmother Lois would take him in and his mother Eunice were there, and they would just share their faith with Timothy, that they would share and teach him the Old Testament truths. More likely typically in a Jewish home, around 5 years old would be when a child would begin a regiment of just learning the Old Testament, of learning the truths, and Timothy was no different. In fact, his mother and grandmother poured into him, maybe before he was even 5, the truths of who God was. And Paul is telling him to remember those things that have just been instilled in him, and make sure he has confidence in those things, from those sacred writings, and make sure that those are things that he depends on during this time of difficulty, during this time when people are just going to go astray from God's word. And I think that is so true and so important for us as we live now, that we remember God's truth and that we rely upon God's truth, upon his word, and make sure that it is not only something that we know, but something that we live out. And so Paul is encouraging Timothy, remember those things, be mindful of those things, be convinced of those things, and live and take your stand on those things. And then he closes verse 15 and just talking about the wisdom that comes from God, and from God alone. All wisdom comes from God. We have no wisdom in and of ourselves. And Paul is reminding Timothy, remember the wisdom that you have from God that has led to your faith, that has led to that understanding that you read about and that you've seen in the lives of those ones who poured their faith into you, not only his grandmother and mother, but also Paul himself. Just be mindful of the wisdom that God has allowed Timothy to learn by learning his word, and for Timothy to hold fast to that wisdom. I want to encourage you today to make sure that you are taking a stand on being faithful in God's word, in reading God's word, studying God's word, but more importantly, applying and living out God's word, and be mindful of the fact that all wisdom comes from God. And as we live in a difficult time, much just like Timothy did, much like a lot of the early church did, may we be mindful of making sure that God's word is first and foremost in our life. Have a wonderful day.